what's your yeah. We can use it for that now. Hello.
Testing, testing, testing. Can you turn me up a little bit? Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much, Ms. Riley. We really appreciate you including us on the tour. I know it was kind of last minute, but we're so happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
You got it? Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so everyone out there in our virtual world, welcome to this program, and everyone here in person, thank you so much for being here. My name is Michaela. I am the event coordinator slash store manager for St. Coco Video Books. Is this anyone's first time being here? Okay, welcome. I want to give you a little information about St. Coco before we get started. So St. Coco was founded in 1997 by a filmmaking couple, Haiti and Shruti, on the greenway. You can actually see Haiti like walking around back and forth. That man that looks like he's like grumpy, he's really not. That's how he really is. And he's the reason why this place exists along with his wife Shruti on the greenway. So they came out with the film Sankofa, and if you're not familiar with the term Sankofa, it is an Adinkra symbol from the Ghana people, West Africa, the Ashanti people, and it means to go back and fetch it. So the reason why we have this bookstore and all this information surrounding me right now is so Black people can go back and fetch their history, fetch their narratives, and move forward into a stronger future. So we're so happy to have Ms. Vanessa Riley here today. Thank you so much. What a fitting book to have for St. Coco Bookstore, Sister Mother Warrior. I saw this when it was coming down the pipe, and I was like, oh, we have to get this in the store. We have to have her in the store because it's so important that we share the narratives, especially of Black women, because so many times we've been written out of history. And especially the Haitian Revolution, like that's something we speak about all the time. The Haitian Revolution is one of those movements that really powered the revolutions around the world for Black people. We heard about what was happening. It was like, we're trying to do the same thing too. So the fact that you have given these two women the spotlight that they deserve is so important. And we thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about Vanessa Riley, tell you a little bit about her. She's an award-winning author of Island Queen. That was a best-selling book in St. Coco. A Good Morning America BuzzFeed. Riley's historical novels showcase the hidden histories of Black women and women of color, emphasizing strong sisterhoods and dazzling multicultural communities. Her works encompass historical fiction, historical romance, and historical mysteries, and have been reviewed by the AAMBC, Washington Post, Entertainment Weekly, NPR, Publisher Weekly, and the New York Times. She's received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly and Booklist. So I'm going to also tell you a little bit about Sister Mother Warrior, if you haven't already gotten the book or perused it. In Sister Mother Warrior, Vanessa Riley brings readers a vivid, sweeping novel of the Haitian Revolution based on the true life stories of two extraordinary women. The first Empress of Haiti, Marie-Claire Renoir, and Grand Toya, a West African-born warrior who helped lead the rebellion that drove out the French and freed the enslaved people of Haiti. So without further ado, I welcome Ms. Vanessa Riley.
Thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to see readers. Thank you for putting me out on a Sunday. There are so many other things you could do on a Sunday than coming to hear me speak. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am living a very privileged life right now because I am getting to tell the stories of my people in a showcase that I couldn't have even imagined when I started writing. These stories being told by people of color, about people of color, was not a thing. It's not for traditionally published. This is a William Morrow book. It's my second hardcover book. I could not have imagined when I started that this would be part of my journey. Because I had been led to believe, and actually it was pretty much true, they weren't interested in our stories. They didn't think that Black people wanted to know about our history. And you probably have friends who don't want to hear about the history because all they can think of is enslavement and the pain. And there have been so many books that are important books And there are also books that kind of what I call pain porn. They show the abuses. They show how we have been ravaged and beaten. And then somebody comes along and saves us. And we're grateful. That did happen. But there are other stories that are crying out to be retold of women and men who did phenomenal things. But their voices have been silenced. Abadoya Toya was famous. She was given a state funeral. Haiti was only barely a year old as a nation. Her coffin is laid with flowers, hibiscus flowers, all on her coffin. It comes down the mountain with like 6 horses trailing before it. The soldiers who had just fought in the battle under her leadership are with that coffin, escorting our sister home. And we don't know her name. I was able to find a comic book that gave some justice to her. But it was little known, indie press, didn't get any of the history. This is a woman, and I'll get into her story in a minute, but also Mary Claire Bonnet. Now I'm very Southern, even though my father's from Trinidad and Tobago, so I will mispronounce stuff. I'm just gonna let y'all know that. I have very good audio people who fix stuff and all that kind of thing. So actually now they have a TWI translator for me for some of these books. Because one of the things, if you haven't read me, I encourage you to read me. But I want you to feel like you're there. And they all weren't speaking English. They were speaking the mother tongue. So if I can find points in the story, Yorbanese will be there, TWI will be there, Fawn is there. Because I want you centered in what was happening. But from a place of safety. Because some of this stuff is it's a little dangerous. But I want my readers safe because history needs to be retold. And we should embrace the good, the bad, but there's a lot more people who've done important things that have been totally washed out of this history. So Mary Claire Bonnet was a free woman of color. She is the first battlefield nurse. Predating Mary C. Cole and Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale, for a long time, she was the only one who would get recognition on the battlefield, unbeknownst that most people that Mary C. Cole trained her, that they were working together in Europe on the battlefield. But in 1800, 50 years approximately before all of that, a woman named Mary Claire Bonnet, whose mother, there was a huge earthquake in Haiti. And Haiti is sitting on a shifting plate, so earthquakes are a common reoccurrence. In 1770, there's a huge earthquake. People are starving in Legané. She and her mother go around and they feed people. I personally believe that's where she started with the soup, because it was nourishing. It was something that she could make with the broth, and the healing broth. And she actually did studies of herbs later on because she wanted the most nutrition. But this is something that followed her throughout her life. The Battle of Jacmel in 1800, literally 1800. She's convinced a group of women to follow her. They're in white on a mule train. Now, personally, I would not wear white on a mule train. Mules are not clean animals, but not going up pigs. This is what she decided to do. And here's another part of faith that I don't quite have. She believed that if these women came on the mule train into the middle of the battlefield, that everybody would stop fighting. I do not have that level of faith. She had that level of faith. But she and her women on the mule train go into the battle, and literally both sides, the French forces, the indigenous forces, everybody stops. And then she begins to bind up the wounds and feed the people. In Jacmel, the starvation, because the blockade was so bad, they were eating the horses. When you eat your horse, you just said, I gave up. Because your horse is your transportation during these time frames. It sometimes is pulling the plow, so you're not even hoping for the earth to give you nourishment. And so she goes there, and they are able to get the medicines to the one doctor that was still left in that city, and hundreds and hundreds of people are saved. That is the first battlefield nurse. She is the first Empress of Haiti. And most people do not know her name, or they'll know her as the wife of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Now, Jean-Jacques Dessalines is an important man. I'm going to come back to him in a second. But let's talk about the other woman in this book. Now, around 2017, I was invited to a movie. I think many of y'all went and saw this movie. It was called Black Panther. And somebody told me that the women, the Dora Milaje, was modeled after a true African tribe. I think I'm pretty up on history. I had never heard this. I thought, yeah, y'all just doing that to make more of us come out. We was coming anyway to the movie because we were supporting. But it was absolutely true. The Dora Milaje were formed after the Minos. The Minos were the second-tier brides of the king of Dahomey. And these women guarded the king. They guarded his first-tier wives, the ones that are having his sons and daughters, et cetera, et cetera. They often led the battle charge. These women are fierce. The Europeans, when they landed in Africa, called them witches because they thought they had magical powers, because these women were trained to feel no pain. They were masters at swinging axes and swords. Now, as a side note, you run into a black woman that feels no pain and she's wielding swords, you better run. Because she's going to get you. I'm just saying. And these women were that intense, that bad. And once again, someone luckily had gone through the history and found these women. And so I'm digging, and I come across this name, Abadoya Toya. And she is a gal, which is leader, means she's training these women. And pieces of the book, because if you read my book, they're going to be kind of long. I'm just going to admit it right now, because I'm a geek of history, and I'm going to try and bring this to you. There was a wall of thorns, acacia thorns, so really sharp thorns. And these women had to crawl up this wall until they felt no more pain. Think about that. This is the kind of conditioning, the kind of training. And one of the things for Abadoya I had to get right was that level of conditioning, and the king is centrally focused, then whatever the king tells you to do is always right. You don't question it, you do it. Now, why is that important? Because the king of Dahomey, many kings of Dahomey, began selling people to the Europeans. It became a very wealthy thing for them. Now, there are some people who will say, well, they didn't understand what the level of slavery was and all that sort of stuff. You know, the apologists out there. I'm sorry, you're selling people. What do you expect, right? But it goes beyond that. That's actually merciful in the Dahomey culture. Because you see, there's really only, if you're a dude, there's only two options. I am going to cut off your head and decorate with your skull and put it on the palace to show my power as a Dahomey king, because I do not trust you. I've taken over the territory. I do not trust that you're not going to gather people together and try to overthrow me. So as a male, I'm going to kill you, put your head on the top of the palace, or I'm going to sell you the road down the Ouida. Two options. If you're a woman, you could be possibly a first-tier wife. You could be possibly a second-tier wife, meaning a Mino, meaning you're looking strong, and I think you two will be great at protecting the king. And you have to be young, because I have to basically put you through this. I just attacked your village. I just took over your village, probably killed some of your kinsmen, probably sold off others. You have to be young enough that I can retrain you to know that I am your king, and you will follow me, and you will do what I say. And then the last option, well, other than the skull decorating, because he did decorate with women's skulls too, you could have been sold to Ouida. So in the Dahomey world, selling you possibly could be more merciful than decorating the palace if you didn't meet those other criteria. But it's a truthful fact. They did sell people to the Europeans. And they got the silver and the gold, and they never heard what happened after that. Abadoya, as a Mino, potentially could have participated. She was leading the charges as they took over other villages. So as I write this novel, I have to reconcile that. What is going through her head? And to me, that was one of the challenges to how do you reconcile this woman? But when you get into her story, she gets captured. She's brought to Saint Domingue, which is present-day Haiti. Saint Domingue, as Adam Smith will tell you, well, he won't tell you now because he did, but it was the wealthiest colony in the West Indies. For every $5 that circulated in the world, 4 came from sugar, indigo, and coffee. That's enslavement dollars. It wasn't the moral right that kept people enslaved. It was capitalism. It was money. They were making money easily. All they had to do was capture folks from Africa to come work these plantations or habitations, as they're known in the French, and they keep the world going. It took a great deal and a long time for the moral right to come into fruition because of the economic power of enslavement. So Abadoria gets captured, she's brought to the Deculus habitation, and because Abadoria knew the herbs, so once we go to Saint Domingue, Saint Domingue has the most enslaved people. It's because the mortality rate is about 30 years. Mass cruelty, and just the, in general, conditions on the ground, the diseases, particularly yellow fever, would take out hundreds of thousands of people every year. Just focus, in America, the average age of an enslaved person was 40 years, 44 years. In Saint Domingue, we're going 30, 34. That 10-year deficit is not to say that the cruelty is less in America versus the West Indies. No, that's probably yellow fever. It's the differential. It's the conditions on the ground. So Abadoria is captured. She's at the Deculus plantation because she knows herbs, because particularly for the babies, they would get this lockjaw, and they couldn't latch on, which was death. She knew the oils from the plants, and that's the other thing. The vegetation in Africa, West Africa, is very similar in the West Indies. So she knew the plants, so she was able to make the oils, and because she was saving these children, she had privileges. So she began to exercise the kids, and you know, if you covered one eye and you watched this, it could look like troop movement. Abadoria had a plan. She was going to pour into these children, and at some point, they would be able to lead the rebellions. They would be able to help take this country and make it free. And one young man in particular was Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He is regarded now as one of the most brilliant tacticians of that time. I don't recall him going to West Point. He didn't. West Point might not have been a thing at that time. He gets everything from Abadoria. She taught him how to position the troops based on the stars, how to choose the best paths through the mountains. All of this military prowess comes from Abadoria. And once again, Jean-Jacques recognized that. He revered her like a mother figure throughout her entire life. When he defeats the French, she is made a duchess in his kingdom. Once again, he is responsible for her. He and his future wife, Mary Claire Bonaire, are responsible for this state funeral. And to me, it always chokes me up. We don't know their names. There are rebellions happening all over the West Indies. But Haiti is successful because of the women. I've never seen more women involved. And most people focus on the 1790s because that's when you start hearing the names like Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques and Henri Christophe and Pétion and a few others. It actually goes back to about 1750s because that's the part the women had started. They had started, remember these herbs and whatnot? Well, some of them were for good. Some of them were not so good. They had started poisoning the masses. They were tired of the abuse. And each one of the colonies, whether it be French, Portuguese, Spain, they had different rules for being free. So if you were in an English-based colony, like Demerara or Montserrat, you paid manumissions at agreed-upon price. The enslaved call it the ransom payment. and you would be free. But you better keep those papers with you forever, because you went to somewhere like Grenada, and any person could come up to you on the street and ask you, can I see your papers? And if you don't have them, you would be jailed. You'd be given 2 to 3 weeks to find new papers. And if you couldn't, particularly like, let's say you came from a different island, you'd be resold. So these are papers you have to keep with you. In France, or in French-based colonies like Saint-Domingue, they had that provision, but they had a different provision also. If a woman has a baby with their Grand Blanc, which is the massa, and he claims the baby, then you and the baby are free. Now, what does that do to a culture? Exactly. You codify in access. And so the rise of the colored. So now you have the affranchi, which are the free blacks, colored, the free coloreds. You have the enslaved at the bottom. And then you have the petit blancs, which are the merchants, and the grand blancs, who are the wealthy guys. Once again, if a grand blanc has a baby with one of his enslaved, and he claims the baby, the woman is automatically free. No money has to be exchanged. You're codifying certain behaviors. But what happens with the colors is the closer adjacency you are to white, you gain more privileges. So now you've got a group of people that society is saying is better than the darker skinned people. And even when the darker skinned people become free, there's this rift that's happening. It's intentional to keep the people separated. This book, we deal with colorism. I was, as I went through Mary Claire, I kept asking him, why is she free? Right? How does she become free? I suspect the records are the records. There needs to be more scholarship in the records. When France was defeated, they took a whole bunch back of records with them, particularly the military records. The archival access is very limited. I wonder why that is. But her grandmother, I believe, is in this situation where she has a baby claimed by Grand Blanc. She is free. Her grandmother has works at a hospital in Saint-Domingue, near the capital. So she has this extraordinary levels of privilege. And so with her family line, I'm able to utilize different shades of these, because Mary Claire's father is a free fisherman. I personally think her mother was like, I'm going to choose the most chocolate man I can possibly choose, because her mother was very fair-skinned, and Mary Claire was a brown-skinned girl. And so we're able to show through these varying shades the different levels of privilege and access. But once the French decide they need to tighten up society, because now you've got the coloreds are doing incredibly well. So well that the Colonial Assembly forces law saying the coloreds have to lend money to the Grand Blancs and the Petit Blancs, and at this rate, because they're doing so economically well. People use laws to control people, to incent behavior. And that's why one reason we really need to look at our history, because it's always repeating itself. We haven't learned as a society. And to me, it's just, I try when I write these books, I want to take you back. Point of safety once again, but I'm going to take you back and I'm going to show you what is going on. The world is smaller. People in the islands know exactly what's going on in Britain. They know what's going on in Spain and France. The rebellion, the French rebellion is happening during the middle of all of this. And that's one of the most fascinating things, because everybody keeps choosing sides on a global scale. So at one point, Spain is like, you know what? We can't get rid of the French, because Spain has Dominican Republic side of Haiti at one point. At one point, France had the entire island, they call it, or no, Spain had the entire island called Hispaniola. The French come in, kick their butts, then the French have it all, then it gets split, and then you have Saint-Domingue and Domingue St. Domingo, which is the Dominican Republic right now. Spain says, you know what? If we let the blacks fight for us, I bet you we will start kicking some butt because they had seen the rebellions, and many of the rebellions are the local rebellions are successful. They're taking over habitations and setting up shop. So they say, okay, you fight for us, you're free. So everybody, including Toussaint Louverture and the rest of the gang, are now fighting for Spain. They're winning battles. The Spain are astonished at how precise and how the military. Toussaint Louverture, his great-great-grandfather or great-grandfather is actually a gal from a leader. Sometimes the word gal they think is king. They thought he was related to a king. More research nowadays showing that he was related to a leader that the Dahomey defeated and sent into enslavement. So the circular, the Dahomeys are your powerhouse during this time frame. And once again, you got the decoration on the palace, or you're going to walk that wheel road. But so Spain says something, and then now France is getting their behind kicks, and they're like, wait a minute. Okay, we were sorry. We're going to give y'all some privileges. Y'all come fight for us. Unfortunately, Toussaint Louverture, which the book talks about, believed the French. He was brought up French speaking. Everybody's French speaking at this point in time. But even when he is enslaved for a moment, he's given privileges and whatnot because he was very, very smart. He was brown skin, dark skin individual. He was just extremely smart. The masses could figure that out, and so he was given more and more privileges. And there's a point where the rebellion is happening. He's gaining power. He's moving up in Spain, where I think his former sommelier, one of the former owners ends up being his sommelier and whatnot. So it's very interesting to see the movement that are happening. But now they're fighting. So I told you. So Spain, before they switch sides, Spain gets deciding that Toussaint's britches are too big. So they're going to capture his nephew, Mose, and they're going to imprison him. And so Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who's now come up, as Jean-Jacques actually at one point is a driver under Toussaint's family and whatnot. So if you go back to the original crew, they all know each other, and that's how they end up coming together. But at this point in time, they're all, I think Jean-Jacques is probably a first, one of the lower level generals at this point. Toussaint is moving up. But when they capture Mosey, everybody realized this is we've been used by Spain to clear the way. And as soon as they get the opportunity, they intended as a power move. We're still heads, and you're also. But what Toussaint and the rest of the gang said was like, oh no, we're gonna switch to France at this point because we don't trust y'all anymore. So they switch. It was funny. Toussaint actually goes to a church service with his boss, and the Spanish boss. And as soon as the church service is over, he leaves, and they join the French side. So it's I love the local politics. That's just one of those little anecdotes of things. But I say that because these guys were smart. History doesn't give us enough credit of how politically savvy we were. And we were, some of us were opportunists. Some of us had to, because we knew where we came from in these different things. And so some of the flavor of the politics, I bring that back to you. There's a Hamilton story. I was like, that boy everywhere. But yeah, there's a Hamilton story involved. He actually wrote the Constitution for Toussaint. Look, Hamilton is, that boy, we gotta do some more research on him. And they used to call him the bastard from Nevers. There are other names they used to call him because, he might be passing. Yeah. Saying it out right now, might be some DNA testing, but he might be passing. Once again, another brilliant man. So we get to the stage, we have Mary Claiborne, who's about feeding the people, nurturing the people. She's about peace. And Abaddon Toya, who's been pouring into Jean-Jacques, she's in her 60s, and she's still on the battlefield. leading forces. There's one battle, two guys come up, they stab her on either side, she gets up, kills them, and keeps going. I think she was 65 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, my trainer tells me to get at that treadmill, I'm gonna have to go do that. I got no more excuses. The more you read history, we got no more excuses.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got both power and peace on both sides, and they're both important. Because without both of these women, the revolution wouldn't have been possible. So that is Sister Mother Warrior. I am on a mission to return the voices that are crying out to be retold. We need to understand, as Black men, as Black women, we had power. And the moment even when we were enslaved, we found moments of joy, and we found moments to figure out how can we change our circumstances. And some of us were brave enough to take those chances, even if it was at risk of death. They took the chances to do it because nobody wants to be enslaved. I love the time frame from 1750 to 1830 because everybody in the world wants freedom, but can't understand why somebody else wants it. So you got, you got the French Revolution that's happening. There's all this turmoil in the West Indies. You've got the Catholics fighting within the Catholics, the Jesuits and the Capuchins. Now, personally, I thought it was all Catholic, but no, apparently not. Jesuits, Capuchins, and they're fighting because they want who's right. Nobody can other see that. That shades of gray, guys, and y'all really the same. It's like First Baptist here on the Second Baptist on the same corner. They're shades of gray. And then you got those darn Americans that want freedom from a world power. But they cannot understand that people who were free, you brought to this, against their will, to this nation, why they want to be free. And so the time frame is roiling, and every time I can find a story that shows a different side, that shows us taking power and winning, I'm going to retell those stories because they need to be brought back to us.
We'll give Ms. Riley another round of applause. Thank you for that. So we can begin our Q&A portion now. Even you all in the back, if you have any questions, you can come up or I'll bring the mic to you, no problem. And I'll start it off with one. So you are a master of historical fiction. My first question to you is, I just want to know how you approach the historical aspect of it, like with your research, and how do you decide what to include and how do you decide what fiction to include to make those stories flow?
So I am a stickler for the timeline. So I'm a stickler for the timeline. And that's two things. One, I love history and I like figuring out different things. I have a file that's from 1750 to 1830, and it's got all the major world happenings, including natural disasters, all the wars. It's Britain, it's Spain, it's France, it's Portuguese, and those darn Americans when they show up. I have all that there, and then I put the character, the persons, every bit of information I can find, when they were born, what they're doing, because all of that is related. The part that's fiction for me is to put in the motivations, right? Because I cannot find, letters. Men actually are really good. Women, we gotta work on this. Men write more. They tell on themselves in letters in ways that I've never, that's great as a researcher. So I can find stuff. So some of Toussaint Louverture's hubris in thinking of France as, being on their side, and his letters to Napoleon are ridiculous. But I have those. We don't have enough for women. We have Anne Frank's diary. That's, I can't really think of other diaries that we have. So as women, so encourage people to journal and whatnot, because that's going to help future historians. But I assume that people are logical in what they do. There was one time in the book before this, Island Queen, she sent, Dorothy Kerwin Thomas has sent her daughter to London for studies because Dorothy is funding a school. Now, if you haven't read Island Queen, another true story about a powerful black woman who comes from enslavement, builds businesses across the West Indies, becoming one of the wealthiest women in the world. And she is funding a school for colored girls in London. She has sent her daughter there for education. Daughter can't hack it. She wants to come home, but instead of coming to Demerara, which is below Guyana, she goes to Grenada where her sister and everything else. I was like, Dorothy's not gonna let this young girl go to Grenada because she's gonna get in trouble, even though her sister's there. And boy, did Dorothy Christina get into some trouble. That's a whole book in itself. But when I look, there's a blockade from the War of 1812. That's the logic that kept Dorothy Christina from coming home to her mother. Would have kept her out of some trouble. But these is pieces. If you don't look at the world, if you don't have that whole timeline of the world, you would just like, that doesn't make any sense. I got to come up with a justification of why she would go there as opposed to here. So once again, I'm a stickler. That thing. And my belief in that people are logical. People want to be loved. People want to be respected. I bring those motivations in. And then I look at how people are writing about these women during that time frame. I can tell through the bits and pieces I found how much Jean-Jacques revered Grantoya. I could tell that. And so that, even though I cannot find his words of saying it, just the actions he did, even on her deathbed, how he goes, he goes to the doctor, he's like, treat her as if she were treating me. These are the bits and pieces that we have that I'm able to pull back together. So the motivations, it's all fictionalized in my head, but it makes sense with the bits of facts that I have in the ground. But to me, that timeline is first. I'm not going to move a war. I'm not going to move a battle. I'm not going to change a law. I am going to be very strict on it. Even sometimes it's painful. It's like, just a few more days. I'm going to be very strict on that because, unfortunately, our books have a little bit more, what's a good word? Scrutiny. There we go. A little bit more scrutiny. For a long time, people didn't believe we could do such types of research, or they would question our facts and things like that. It's one of the reasons I put a detailed bibliography in the back of all my books. So you don't believe me? Find it. It's, and also because there are other researchers out here. I'm giving you a leg up. I had to pull all this together. You shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm giving you the steps because there needs to be more books. There's so many, like Santa Belair, there's so many other women that did amazing things during the Haitian Revolution. And I just picked up 2. And I want people to tell these stories.
Thank you. Did we have any questions in the audience? Don't be shy.
So how do you find balance energetically and spiritually and tap back into grounding yourself when you hear or when you're drawn to all of these stories? Because I know as Black women, that nurturing, healing portion of us kind of like opens up our heart space. And when you're receiving all these stories, you're receiving pain and all of those things. So what are your protective measures when you're going through all of this?
Absolutely. And self-care is so important. And, the pain, the bits of pain, when I write these stories, I'm very selective in those moments of pain. Because there's 2 things. I don't want anybody to ever be confused that because these women and men did something phenomenal, that enslavement was not a horrible thing. So it's a point, I have to point this out, unfortunately. And so, but I'm very selective. You'll get those key moments, but you're not gonna be like, oh God, this is gonna happen next page and all these sorts of things. Because that's not my story. That's not the story I'm trying to tell. I'm trying to show you how they overcame. But I have to be very clear because people will get confused because they want to read a certain narrative and make excuses, et cetera, et cetera. There are points where allow yourself to get mad. You know, I've thrown 100-year-old books across the room. Now, I'm probably mad that I did that because I broke them. 100-year-old book. But the people writing these books will say things like I'll give you an example. I was reading on Dorothy Kirwan, and her first two children are by her brother, her half-brother, Massa's son, and they called it a relationship. You have an enslaved woman, half-brother, they're calling it a relationship. It should be called rape, it should be called incest. It is not a relationship. She's enslaved, she has no choice. That threw the book across the room. So the first thing is you have to realize you're human and you can have these emotions and you can give yourself liberty to throw a 100-year-old book across the room. That's the first thing. Number two, you got to find moments of your own joy. So sometimes it's cooking, sometimes it's looking at the structures my daughter builds in Minecraft. It is, you just find other things. Sometimes I treat myself to like expensive chocolate. I like banana chocolates. And so I accomplish a chapter or I do some heavy lifting or it's Tuesday, I'll grab a piece of chocolate. So you find different rituals because it is heavy lifting sometimes, right? The other thing is I always make sure the stories have some balance. You're going to see moments of joy. So I may have to leave a section that I'm writing and go switch over to something. Because one of the things I want to write in the rawness of the universe is that Black women have always been desirable. Even when we were enslaved. Even when they pretended that we weren't human. We've always been desirable. And some of the love stories, like the love story between Mary Claire Bonner and Jean-Jacques Dessalines is one of the stories we should know about. One of the long-lasting love affairs of the ages. We do not know about that because it doesn't fit a certain narrative. So I want to return to it. So you find your moments of joy. You give yourself the ability to be angry, but then you keep moving. So that's pretty much how I do it.
How long is your process for writing from start to finish when writing a book?
Okay. It has evolved over time. And now I write in three levels. So the first is a quick draft. Why do I do that? Because if I'm detailed, I'm gonna get a 200,000 word book, and that's way too long. I've been told. Not to me. So I do a very quick draft, and I focus on what is happening, the emotions, the actions, the places, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I hit that within 2 months. Then I go back, and now we're putting in the details. I'm a sensory writer, so you're gonna hit the smells and the textures, the fabrics, and if it's a long period, the changes in, every 5 to 10 years, this dress changes. You have to account for that. So that's in that layer. Everybody believes the West Indies is just beach and ocean, right? No, if you're in Saint Domingue, in the Cap, you're gonna feel like you are there. So the things that make that place special, that's coming in on this second round. That may be another 6 weeks. And then the last month is shaping it. Making it sweeping, figuring out, did I go deep enough in the motivations? Am I showing you her heart on these pages? Making sure that you are always turning that page, that there can't be a moment that just like, okay, whatever. I want you to get through it. So in totality, it may be 6 months. But this is, as the phrase, this ain't my first rodeo, kind of thing, it really is not, right? This is book number 22, so I've perfected my process because I don't want to scare young writers. That first book, I rewrote 125 times. That first book took like 4 or 5 years to get done because I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? So as you get into your zone, as you find your purpose, you get sharper and sharper and sharper. And all my books are going to be between 1750 and 1830 because I know that like the back of my head, right? So that makes it easier. So you find your jam, guys. Find the period of time that you are most interested in and learn everything you possibly can about it. You know, I had about 6 to 10 years of research that I'm banking on before I got into, you know, this level of book because I started historical romance, particularly in the Regency era, bringing in the Caribbean influence in those books. But now we're in historical mystery and historical fiction because I could bring the wealth of the politics and things that you wouldn't in those other stories you wouldn't actually find, and being able to return those to you. But that's someone else starting scratch would have to do all of that research. So that's why my process sounds, you know, like a robot, which, you know, might be. No problem.
So, quick question. You said, you know, when you go back for your second draft, you put in the textures, the smells, this and that takes you around 4 to 6 months, you said?
4 to 6 weeks at that point.
Weeks, okay.
Yeah, it's hot at that point because now I know this, you know, like the first 2 months you're still, you know, I have the timeline, I know where I have to go, but you're still, what scenes am I going to show to get us there? You know, you're doing that much. You probably heard of those models. There's the planner and the pantster. And I'm a planster because I make the overarching. This is my timeline, and I'm going to stick to that. But how I get from point that can be pantsing, or that could be like I found. I found when I was doing research on this, opera in Saint Domingue was huge. When I think Haiti, I don't think opera, right? But that's part of the cultural pieces that's gone, right? I'm like, y'all gonna get a bit of the opera. I'm gonna bring back, I'm gonna find it because it's a model of colorism. Because at first, everybody, all the free people could come, black, colored, etc., and the blacks, all in. Then they had a section in the theater, and then all of a sudden, the blacks couldn't help. They couldn't be on stage. They had to help with scenery. But the coloreds could still sing. And then all of a sudden the coloreds couldn't sing they had to be in the background. So it's a great model to show how colorism and this whole thing about suppressing the classes are showcased. So when I got that great fact, I had to figure out where to put it in the book and how to showcase it and things like that. That's the pantsing part. But it's always, I know the story I'm trying to tell, or at least I'm pretty like 90% sure of the story I'm trying to tell because you got to give yourself a little leeway of the characters coming alive at a certain point. And as long as you're adhering to the timeline, you can dip and dab and figure out what scenes you actually need to showcase and to keep the action moving. So so that second draft to me is the big one. And if I'm in the zone, it's an easy one. If I'm struggling and the second pass, it means my first pass is not where it needs to be. So I will stop and go back to that first pass and like, what's not working in this first pass? First pass is probably a third of my word count, too. Sometimes you will go and like, if it's too long, you may figure out you don't need all of that, or you didn't go deep enough. So that's why I call it almost like a fast draft that first time in the process. But every writer is different. You've got to figure out your zone and hone in.
So how much of your writing, let's say with this book and other, when you say you've done 22 books, how much of it is what you would consider flow? Like when you say the characters come alive, where it's like kind of writing itself versus you directing the words on the page?
It's pretty much all, it's flow. It's especially the second and third pass, it's flow at this point. Because you know, like for me, that quick draft I told you about, I kind of know who they are because of the way time has had to position it. So one of the things for this book, I told you, Abadoya, now this is the author intrusion, I have to have her recognize that she was following the king's orders, but there's still responsibility, right? There's still responsibility that you carried out the king's orders, that you have helped enslaved people, and now you understand fully what that means, right? So she's got to recognize that, and she's got to almost deprogram, because I told you that the Minos training is so intense, one could look at it as brainwashing. That the king is always right, the king is God, the king knows what he's doing, the king must have a greater plan for this. And Abadoya has to reconcile that. So I have to choose moments in the story that's going to showcase that. And sometimes that shifts based on, you know, what the characters are doing. And then Abadoya's voice is real at this point to me, right? So she may say, no, girl, over here. This is the moment that you will go. And that's one of the reasons I love writing in layers, because you may not, there's so much work you're doing on that first layer, you won't necessarily pick up the subtleties that you need to go through. But when you go in that second and that third layer, that's where the subtleties, and her voice is so crystal clear. By the time you get to that third, you know exactly what you need to do. And so that's real, you're really flowing at that point, because that, you know, I'm doing a book on two women, they have to sound differently. They have to think differently based on just where they are, the socioeconomics. Mary Claire has never been enslaved. So when she sees retribution that happens as different sides who have been enslaved take the retribution against Massa, she may have a different reaction. Because remember, she was trying to feed and bandage up everybody. You've got to reconcile that. And that voice is distinctly different than Abadoya's, who's like, let's get him. So does that make sense? Excellent, excellent.
What has been like going through my mind, because I'm right in front, so I'm staring at the title, it's like I see a trinity here, and it's it can be perceived as a feminine trinity, which we don't see as often. I know that you have two characters in this story, and I haven't read it yet, so I'm asking these questions out of curiosity. But when you say sister, mother, warrior, these parts, this trinity, is that her character, and why not sister, mother, daughter?
So the mother-daughter relationships are in there on every side. Okay, so backstory. Turned in the first manuscript, and my editor was like, so how did she become a Dahomey warrior? What are you talking about? I had to go back and figure out how she became a Dahomey warrior, because unfortunately this is part of the records that's missing, right? The African tradition is very oral, and she's now firmly part of the Haitian mythology, trying to find out how did she come into being. The name Abadoya Toya was like the gossip, right? You break down this name, the name is not Fawn, the name is not Dahomey. So I knew she had to be one of the people that got captured in the process. And even the name is prophetic. It means separated by water. So I'm like, Lord, thank you. I got an answer now. But you know, as an author, you get to intrude, right? You get to intrude. You're shaping these things, and these things just all lined up. So I had a story for her, and so in Abadoya, not to give out too many things, her mother decides to let her be captured by herself. I think that's the best way to put it. The mother makes the decision that she is not going to make it, and she may hasten things along, and leaves Abadoya, a 12-year-old girl, by herself. And Abadoya at one point is angry at her mother's choice. And then later she figures out why she made the choice. Because the mother knew she would either be a decoration, or she would be sold and she would be separated anyway, and she would rather her daughter to know what happened to her as opposed to always wondering. So she makes a choice, and Abadoya is angry at the choice in the beginning. So that's that mother relationship. There are sisterhoods. I always write about sisterhoods. There's sisterhoods in this book. Abadoya has a really great friend, and they end up having a falling out. You go to Mary Claire Bonheur, she has an aunt who's relatively the same age as she is. That's a strong sisterhood. She's got a mom, and the mom is special. You get that in the book. And to me, both women are warriors. Soft power is just as important as physical power. They were both needed to shape the Haitian Revolution. And you get it in these women and their connection to Jean-Jacques, which is another, I didn't realize this until I started doing the research, that there was a relationship between that Grand Toya and Dessalines, and then Dessalines and Mary Queen Bonaire. This is, sometimes things just fall in together, but I think I found Toya, then I found Dessalines, and then I started doing research. Well, who does Dessalines know? And then I find Mary Claire, and she's perfect, the balance that I'm looking for, because that's our story. It is wide, it's diverse, and there's so many unusual parts, but it shouldn't be unusual. We should know this. The Haitian Revolution, particularly the things that happened afterwards, it's a model of Black power. And it's been stripped from us. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois writes about it in different aspects. And there's, what follows on is even more amazing. And we know none of this. And we need to know it. It's incredible. One of the, I did a signing on the book launch. One of the Port-au-Prince comes up and she's in tears. She's like, we know about the men. And if she's from Haiti, we know about the men. She's like, the women are just the line. So I'm happy to return these stories. I'm living in this moment. It's a storied moment. And I need y'all's help. Spread the word. Get people reading these books. Publishers are looking. Like, we have a window of time right now where anybody can tell this story and get out there. But they're looking. They need to see the buzz. They need to see that people want to hear these stories. So I need your help as much as possible to get these stories out. Request Vanessa Riley books in your local library. That helps just as much as buying the book. So, any more questions?
My question is, have you been to Haiti or any of these places that you write about to experience it yourself and to live in, and to feel it, and to be able to tap into those moments?
I had the most beautiful trip planned, and this thing called COVID came along. And so I ended up having to, because of it's 200 years. So the only things that's still in existence actually come after this point in time, and that is the Citadel and the Palace in Milo. There's also another palace, but that's King Christoph's era, which is after this. So I relied on YouTube videos, video bloggers. Remember I told you We Need to Journal? The video bloggers are amazing. There was one who literally walked up the mountain, and she gets really close to Fort Madame, but you can kind of see it in the distance. I'm like, thank you. Because of the hurricanes and earthquakes, a lot of the things aren't there, and then the Americans in the 40s come and rename all the streets and whatnot, and so that we need access to the original plans. I'm a big proponent of maps. Most of the maps already have old maps with elevations and whatnot. I found a city street map. So you're literally going to walk down the streets that Mary Claire is walking down. We've got the elevation maps for the DeClose plantation. So I bring in as much, I go about this as scientifically as I possibly can. I still intend to take my big trip. But yeah, they got ahead of the fan with that darn COVID thing.
You have several different parts in your book, and before each part, you have like poetry. I want to know what is intended and why each section in the portion that section done in that style.
Okay. So my father's from Trinidad and Tobago, and he would tell me a story. He would tell us stories as we grew up, and it was a rhythm. And one of the things that came back to me writing this was this rhythm. And there were so many things, particularly in 1758, both Mary Claire and Jean-Jacques of the North. The twin theme is going to be very huge. And so this poem comes to me, and it's set to the same tune, same beat, same rhythm that my father used to tell. And I just included it because it's like a prophecy. So that's total authorism, right? Intrusion, but it's kind of a little homage to my father, because I wish I had paid attention more. Because when I was young, I didn't understand the stories he was telling me. But I'm so glad that they're in my soul because they come out. And the hunger to tell these stories. And Utenzi is a Northern African style of poetry. So I made the poem that was coming in my head to fit that, so that it would be like, yeah, I found it. No, I made that up, but that's the action. That's logistical.
I have one more question. I'm always full of questions.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I love to do research in history and to dig deeper, but I come across there is a barrier of finding, like digging deeper, and when it comes to our history and Black history, and especially in the Caribbean as well. So how do you get over that, or you get deeper into that when there is such a barrier when trying to find history?
Because they tell on themselves. You go and you get these 100-year-old books and you read what they're writing, and they'll try and clean it up as much as possible, but it's still there. So like in Montserrat, I found that the council was going to raise the manumissions price. And once again, when you talk manumissions, that's enslavement. That's the money to free people. They were going to raise it from 45 pounds to 100 pounds. And the masses came up and said, no, we have to reward the women for their love and faithfulness. Okay, first your head like spins, but they're telling on themselves. So you have to decode. I've become an expert of decoding what they're writing about. And so then now I've got a time frame. I'm looking for the laws that govern this and who's on the political council. You have to become a sleuth. Another key resource is the British Archive newspapers.com. Something like that. British Archive newspaper. The British Archives, because Britain one time ruled the world. The Grenadian papers there, the Bahamian newspapers are there. And the papers will tell you something different than what's in your history books because it's in the ground, right there is what's happening. So I rely on those. And the latter thing, unfortunately, is sometimes you gotta translate. So this book in particular, Matteo interviews Mary Claire 10 years after all this happens. That's the freshest resource. I found out that Jean-Jacques likes to dance, right? That's a piece of history I would never have known about. And that's one of those things I had to add into the thing. We love the drums, we love the dance. I had to translate French for that. So you gotta fight for your history, girl. You gotta just dig. They tell on themselves, look at the bibliography. I'm a bibliography chaser. Sometimes I get a book and all I am doing is looking at the bibliography because I want to read where it came from because everything is colored by the lens of the storyteller. Yeah. Even what I write is colored by the lens of the storyteller because I am returning us. So it won't be a relationship. It will be what it is. It will be, I showcase all that. So you become a sleuth and you're be dedicated. Last thing is, if you ever find anything, you copy it, you Kinko the URL, you PDF it, you do whatever you will never find it again. Never. I got 3-4 books I could have written. Can't find it. So that's it. The archives are now online. There's lots of archives. The pandemic actually helped put certain museums online. Look at those art and those paintings. The paintings tell a story. You will find us in paintings that you would never expect us to be, and we're right there in public, and you wouldn't even know it. So,
thank you. Okay, I think we are all full from that experience. Thank you so much, Ms. Riley. That was beyond anything I could have imagined. I've learned so much just from sitting here. Thank you so much.
I love talking to readers, and y'all can tell I'm very excitable.
So if anyone would like to purchase the book and have it signed, you can do so with the handsome gentleman back there. His name is Jonathan. He has more copies, and you can come back and we have this for you. autograph some books. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
And he has it at the register. Okay, thank you.
Hello? She's a writer.
Oh, well,
Where are they?
I'm getting there. I had to work on like transmitting classes and everything. I told myself for a long time that I wasn't a writer. Because I always compare myself and often and all those things. So I'm here to.
You know that imposter syndrome doesn't happen to imposters? I heard that last night. I was like, that's the most awesome thing. What is your name?
Tay. T-A-Y. And that will change, and I hope to. I definitely have a story that I want to tell.